Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Starr, and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. Heart Warriors is a series I've been guided and inspired to do thanks to my energetic connection with Katajuda. Katajuda is the sacred masculine site in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, our sacred feminine side. What I'm here to do is to give a platform to our men to articulate their journey into the heart so they can share their experiences, their highs, their lows, their wisdom, their insights, their knowledge, tools, practices with other men now walking this path. And of course, us women who are walking right there beside them. Today's guest is a man called Jez Hughes, and Jez is over in the UK. Now, he is a shamanic healer and teacher, and he's also a writer and author. So, really looking forward to unpacking Jez's story into the heart. As it is, this is our number 50 of the Heart Warrior series. And I did say at the beginning I would interview 100 men. So we're halfway there, and maybe we'll go over the 100 mark. We'll see what happens. So my heartfelt gratitude to all the 50 Heart Warriors so far, and anticipated gratitude for the next 50 to come. So enjoy the show. Hello, Jez Hughes. Welcome to Heart Warriors.
Hi, nice to be here.
You're over
Really
in
nice to
the
be
UK, right? Whereabout are you?
in Sussex, so just south of London, really, about an hour south of London.
Oh, lovely. Great. So, I always like to start with getting to know a little bit about the man, but I like to get to know the inner man without all your labels. How would you describe yourself?
Whoa, that's a big first question, isn't it? How would I describe myself? As a man or as a person? As a man.
Yeah.
Um, ay, ay, ay. Inquisitive, I think, for sure. I think my life reflects a searching quality, restless. I'm quite restless a lot of the time. I need to. Throughout my life, I think I've sought a lot of answers to questions, big questions as well, life questions, and hence getting on a spiritual path. And so there's a definite, and I love traveling. I love visiting different cultures. I spend a lot of time and in with different cultures and seeing different lands. That's my passion. I think exploration. So whether that is exploration internally or externally, I think these are the things that really fire me up. Um, so that's one side. The other side is quite normal, and I've always craved to be really normal. And I didn't expect to kind of. I grew up in a very kind of quite small town with a small town mentality, and I expected to stay there on some level, I think, and get a nice office job and spend my life uh, in a kind of very conventional way. I think there's a part of me that's very restless and always seeking the unconventional, and that clashes sometimes with the more conventional side. But the unconventional side won. So
Lucky for us. Let's go back to that childhood, Jez. What would you say was the main challenge that you had as a little boy?
the main challenge. I mean, I think to be honest, I think I had a really good childhood. I really look back. I had parents that were very stable, and there was a lot. I mean, growing up in the 70s and 80s as well, there was a lot more freedom, particularly like to explore. To I mean, I just spent most of the time outside. And if we weren't outside, we were kicked outside, whatever the weather, which was great. The challenges came for me much more around teenage time. Uh, um, much more. I think that transition, which I see a lot, in particular with men, but women as well. But that transition between the child and the adult can be quite difficult, and for me, that's when a lot of my challenges came in, and they came through con- having this convulsive fit, and then that sending me a little bit mad for quite a few years. Um, and and also I was in an environment. I was going to be a professional footballer, or soccer, you call it, and that was in the 80s. That was a very, very macho culture, incredibly macho, and there was a lot of bullying. There was a lot of abuse as well that's coming out now, in terms of the coaches and stuff like that. So that, getting sucked into that world, and obviously that's what I wanted to be more than ever, anything, to be a professional footballer. And I was signed for a professional team. It was very serious. It was very but the flip side of that, there was, like I say, because I think I was a bit different, and I wasn't really that macho, unfortunately. I could get away with a little bit of it, but so when I went into that environment and a lot of older boys and stuff, I got bullied quite intensely and quite badly, and that shut me down really. And like I say, there was an abusive coach as well, and so that, being in that environment, shut me down a lot, um, and then created a lot of problems. I just didn't know how to compete, if you like, and with that, and then I think a lot of men have received this, when you have a relentless bullying that goes on and on and on. You just can't. You don't know how to fight back. I didn't have it in me. I didn't have the kind of tools, or so I just shut down. And like I say, so that caused a lot. And then I had other stuff going on, like I said, with these fits, and so a lot of anxiety come out of that and that transition, and not really having, but like a lot of men also, I had real shame about it, so I didn't tell anyone about it. I had complete shame, and because on one hand I was living this dream life. I was going away playing for a professional football club at 14 and 15. We were traveling all around Europe on football tours, and everyone, and I was a kind of a bit of a superstar, if you like, in my, not superstar, but a bit in my town, because everyone knew I played for this professional club. I was with almost got into the England team, but I hated it because it was horrendous. So I think that split, and not being able to talk to anyone about that, what I was experiencing, and feeling that real shame of not being a man, not being able to stand up for myself, not being able to fight back, and so I think I turned a lot of that inwards, and that created quite a bit of conflict, and also, and it meant I not deliberately, but I made this decision um, not to speak, as a kind of defense, really, and so for I've always had a kind of natural shyness, I think, and people don't see that so much nowadays, but um, so that shyness was exacerbated, and I'd almost made this decision not to speak. So I found social situations very difficult, because I just shut down, and then I hated that, because I am more of a, I'm quite a talker, and quite a social character. So is that transition, not knowing how to transition, and not having the guidance from a boy to man, and then the situation that was around it at the time.
Oh, this is a great subject. Thank you, Jez. I'd like to open this up into if you could speak to parents who have some awareness that their children are getting bullied, and what would you say to those parents?
I mean, it's difficult, because to this day, bullying really riles me up. So if there's any kind, it really, I get very protective, particularly over people I love, and um, but that doesn't always work, because the parent can't fight the child's battles completely, and so, because that also is not empowering for the child. So I mean, I would, I think the most important thing is to get the child to open up and to provide a space for them to be able to speak about the emotional impact, the pain, the trauma, the shame, whatever it is. So there's one safe place where that person can um, open up and feel not ashamed, just feel really accepted that this is part of life, that uh, and that many people, I think, who go on to achieve quite a bit in life have similar stories. You get a lot of artists, a lot of actors, a lot of people that have who go on, or in any field of life, go on, have a similar story of feeling a bit like an outsider. uh, I mean, I can laugh about it now, but the main thing I got bullied for was being, they used to think I was from outer space because I was not very, um, or that I was on drugs all the time, which is kind of, which obviously I wasn't, because I was very otherworldly then, and I have a tendency to be quite otherworldly anyway. So in a way, what I got bullied for was, and being different and very different, not being able to fit into the kind of, especially 1980s, what it meant to be a young man, is what I've gone on and kind of has become very uh, useful in my life, because it means that I don't tend to fit in, and that to conventional society, and that's something I'm really happy with, to be honest. Um, and society's changed a lot since the 80s, but people are the same. And so I would somehow try and turn it around as if it's not a shameful experience. It's something that is, in the long run, can be empowering. I think the most important thing is the child feels empowered, and particularly for young boys, they need to feel like, um, not that someone's completely fighting their other battles. I think it's really important that there's a safe space to, it's like a harbor that you can go and cry or whatever, or express your fears or whatever, but then that strengthens you to go into life and face up. I think, I mean, if you look at a lot of traditional societies, and this is probably what you're trying to do here, is stories help. So other people's stories. So using examples of a lot, like I say, a lot of people have gone through similar experiences, and it's in some way it propels them into their path or their life journey, really, because as humans, I think we grow often through challenge as much as through, and particularly boys and men, they need some edge to go against, and the whether it's through bullying, and particularly around that age, or whether adolescent boys will push those limits themselves through getting into trouble, through being doing stupid things, or pushing up against society. There's always a kind of need, I think, and it's important to contain that without destroying it, without suppressing it. So that these are part of life's initiations. I mean, I've not really spoken about this to many people, to be honest. Certainly not on a podcast. So, yeah, I would encourage the to see the bigger picture as well. That this is a chapter, and that a lot of people that feel an outsider or feel, and that's basically what bullying does. You probably feel a bit of an outsider anyway, and then this compounds it. This feeling of being, and it's and because we are social beings as humans, it's incredibly painful it's something very very primal inside of the human being. If we feel like we're an outsider in tens of thousands of years ago, if people were literally pushed out of the village or the community or the tribe, they would, it's life or death. So it's a very powerful emotions that it invokes. So trying to see that, and provide safe spaces, like I say, um, without too much smothering, definitely.
A difficult balance to
Yeah, really, yeah.
navigate, for sure. Yeah, that's
Because you don't want to go from one extreme to the other. You don't want to go from this place where you feel like a complete outsider with your peers, where you really need to fit in, to then just feeling too, almost too safe in a home where, and then that makes you not want to go out. And so it is a really difficult balance. I don't think there's an easy answer, but to support. So I think that's the nature of healing, in any way, to support people with, and that then they can do what they need to do to heal, to change.
yeah. So
Like, be that support here that helps the push the person out into the world.
right, great advice. Yeah. So how did you start spiraling up and coming back from that bullying? Like, did it continue right through school? Did you have to wait till you were a young adult before you could start healing that? Or did you find some strategies in your later teens to deal with it?
I mean, I had this juxtaposition where I was very popular at school. I was very popular in my hometown. Had lots of friends. It was this specific football experience, which meant every school holiday and every. So it wasn't relentless. So I was lucky in that way. At the same time, which I've talked a lot about, I had these around about the same time I started developing these fits, and well, I had one fit particularly which kind of blew me open, and that then precipitated quite a bit of anxiety, and then throughout my late teens and throughout my 20s would be these and the bullying did come back actually at university, which I couldn't believe. But it was at the same time this precipitated a lot or caused a lot of these struggles with mental health, and that was in an age where no one even really talked about depression. There was no information, particularly where I grew up, which was and I grew up in a very male household. There was three boys, and obviously my dad, and my mum was the only female, so it was a very male household. And the town I come from is a very male town. I think the ratio is 7 men to 1 woman or something. It's a very working class, and it's got that very working class attitude, really, if you just get on with life, and it's quite, it was, and the school was, which I loved, but it was very rough and tough. Um, so um, I was going through this and this shutting down, and I think exacerbated a lot. And my difficulties then in social situations exacerbated a lot of these problems. And then I really, like a lot of young men, developed a taste for alcohol, even though I didn't really. It used to make me sick a lot, but I used to, so a lot through my late teens and then early 20s, in order to, and again, I didn't tell anyone about what was going on for me. I mean, I think my parents they suspected some things, and but it was always seen as a physical problem. So I had loads of tests and brain scans and all of this stuff. But really, what was going on for me, I was screaming inside. I had so much emotion, and and my mind was literally going crazy, and but which then led to experiences of just walking on the street and hallucinating and not being able to separate myself, and but again not telling anyone about it because I had so much shame around it. So alcohol became a kind of a crutch to kind of just obliterate myself. I literally used to drink in my late teens and early 20s to black out, to try attempt to black out, and it worked. But then that would be even worse because you wake up the next day and you just don't know what has happened, um, and so what it so this yeah in those days there wasn't really, people didn't even talk about coping mechanisms, to be honest. There wasn't even a language around mental illness or any kind of dealing with stress, or not that, well, not the way where I grew up, and the experiences I had. I mean, it maybe if I'd opened up a bit, and I look back and I think I wish I'd opened up more, but it was this terrific shame I felt that I was somehow, I think it compounded this feeling of not, of being an outsider, not being able to fit in, and being really, I was going to swear then, but being really weird. Do you know what I mean? Really like not normal in my head and in anything. And um, what I remember the first time I come out of that in my sort of about around the age of 23 was when I just randomly saw this book advertised in a newspaper, and I bought it, and it was all about mental health problems like anxiety disorders and all of this. And suddenly there was it was like a manual, if you like, that it was describing a lot of what I'd been experiencing for the last, God knows, for well, a lot since teenage time. And so that, just the fact that I wasn't alone, I wasn't, the other people were going through this, and it was an American book, so it was a bit far more advanced in the UK, and so that relieved a lot, and then I kind of got back into kind of sorry, I'll just um so that relieved a lot of symptoms for a while, and then through going away and exploring some meditation retreats, it all came back up to the surface, and then I had to find a spiritual path, and that led me on to into shamanism, really. And that's eventually through a circular route. I discovered shamanism, and that really spoke to me. Again, it offered, the main thing it offered at the beginning was a context, and the context, instead of it being a disorder, which the first book had been about, it talked about this idea of a shamanic sickness, which is a worldwide phenomenon, which I write about in my book, where it can, these kind of spiritual awakenings can mimic a lot of mental illnesses, what we call mental illness, and people can go through long periods, even in traditional cultures, 7 years, 10 years, of struggling, and fighting with themselves, fighting their demons, fighting life, really. And so this, but that, it's like a mark of a healer, if you like. It's part of the initiation. So again, this context that I wasn't crazy. This is something that's been happening for thousands and even tens of thousands of years, that human beings have been pushed to the edge, and they're the ones that tend to be the healers or the seers, they're the ones that of service to their community. So there was a meaning behind it. There was and that I still had to develop tools and go on a real journey to explore these things. But and I realize now, more in context, maybe I didn't at the time, but that my experiences that had pushed me to the margins, really, and of society, and but that was for a reason. So I'm really, I think providing meaning and context and the bigger picture rather than pathologizing things, I think is incredibly empowering in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah, this is great. What would you say to men who are going through this sort of similar experience? I think you described it as a shamanic illness.
Sickness, they call it,
Yes,
yeah.
sorry, yeah. And they haven't been able to find that meaning yet. What?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be shamanic. There's because we could call it the dark night of the soul. Many people come to spirituality or healing modalities or open themselves up through these kind of crises when they lose all meaning in life. They feel they can't function in the world, and whether that exhibits as mental health problems, which it often does. Um, so I mean, that's what I've been doing for the last 15 years or 17 years now as a job, is helping people. We were talking about, I was doing a bit of teaching last night, and people, anyone can go through this where their soul has a plan maybe for them, or a desire, and the more disconnected people come from that through conditioning, through trying to fit into family systems, or social conditioning, or trying to do the right thing maybe, or be the person. Over years and years, men can develop, and people can develop these masks that, in order to fit in order to try and function in the world. And what happens I think at some point, these crises happens where the mask just doesn't work anymore, and that disconnect between what is really inside of a person and who they're trying to be becomes so wide that it causes chasm. So the journey, I suppose, is to start to take off some of those masks and to really explore what is real, and what matters to the person, what matters on a soul level. And so that is, and I think when men particularly struggle to reach out for help, in my experience, and and that's why, as because I worked as a healer, I've worked, like I said, for 15 years. I love it when men come. They don't come so often, but there tends to be, because there is still this social conditioning not to reach out for help, and this sense of being a failure or not being able to work it out themselves. And so the biggest advice I would give would be to reach out for help, but also to go on that journey, and that's unique for every individual, of what it is inside that has been, what everything else has covered up. What is that soul need, that soul desire? And it can be simple. It doesn't have to be complex. It can be something, it can be just about, and this is also true for men, to about, we touch our soul much more when we learn to be vulnerable. And that vulnerability, if we cover that vulnerability up too much, we lose connection to life. We lose, because that is what our souls are, very delicate, and life is this really delicate thing, and we get in touch with that, and you can see that in the modern world, how we've become so desensitized to the world, and almost like formulaic machines, and taking all of that away and learning to be vulnerable and raw. That's when we get in touch with something much more real inside of us. And for men, and I've worked a lot with men and women, obviously, and for men that can be different. And I think you said, in before we went on, before we started, that men can often attempt to learn that vulnerability through women, maybe through partners or through friends. But in my experience, having witnessed a lot and I used to be in men's groups a lot, that raw vulnerability for men can be different, and it's important that men learn that unique way in, because it might appear in the beginning as this extraordinarily powerful rage, and that can be terrifying. Uh, and it, I think that needs to be held often, because that can be the surface. Actually, pure anger and pure rage, when it's expressed in a contained way, in a ritualistic way, makes us very vulnerable, because it burns out very quickly, and then we're left with this, often what's beneath that, which can be deep sadness or grief. And I've seen this pattern, so not just unique to men, but I've seen it a lot in men, where they need to go through this rage, and that can be scary. And I think it needs a lot of other men who aren't afraid of that rage, because a lot of people and have experienced that rage in a very destructive way. But actually, in getting in touch with that fire, and really allowing that to release in a cathartic way, but in a ritualistic way, in a contained way, then then we can start to get in touch with much more of the vulnerability which is underneath. But often I think men are kind of taught nowadays to try and get in touch with that vulnerability first. I mean, the more softer aspects of it, the tears or the emotional openness. But everyone has to go through. It's a process, I think.
Oh, this is so good because exactly as you said, like what you were saying about men's vulnerability and what's under the anger just really resonates, as opposed to more what maybe the more feminine vulnerability is. Um, is there anything else that needs to be said around that important topic as regards to men? How do they, like, some men have never been allowed to express their anger, or some men have always been, shamed for being angry. How does a man ex- come to a healthy acknowledgement of his anger and learn to manage it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think it's different for each individual, obviously, and there's no kind of just blanket prescription. What in From the perspective that I come from, I think civilization in general is is can be. Um, there's a lot of great things that have come from civilization, obviously, and we wouldn't be talking like this on this in this way over Zoom without it. But what civilization can suppress is the wilder aspects of being human, and this is for men and women. Um, and so, from my perspective, when we do a lot of rituals, shamanic ceremonies in the woods where I live in the UK, at the beginning, it's about releasing that wildness, allowing that wildness to come through. So the wildness can come through the drum, and it can come through being very in a primal space. So literally with the drum, with a fire, in a group of people, or in this case, it could be a group of men, to get in touch with that raw power and that raw passion, but in a way that isn't just like going crazy and just banging a drum around a fire. And that's what the shaman is there for, to really contain that and hold it. And so doing something very primal like that, because also a lot of spirituality, as it's taught and as it's coming back in the West, can emphasize these things like mindfulness or stillness, or um, uh, which is great. But actually, as Westerners, I think we need much more embodied spirituality. We need something that is going to come into our body and get us, because this is what we've been cut off from, particularly men. Even the classic is like the shirt and tie, which is literally strangling you from the it's all up here. So men are taught to be all very kind of heady and in that way. So bringing it down into a much more embodied, and in my experience, men and women, but that male energy needs challenge in spirituality. So hence a lot of Indigenous initiations for young boys, would be very physically grueling, really physically grueling, and that's something that, and that's why I think there's a lot of men attracted to things like plant medicine, because they see it as a kind of challenge. Oh, I'm going to consume all this plant and go on this mad journey and see what happens. And but I think we can do that in different ways. I think we can much more get in touch with this primal element within the fire, really get in touch with that fire within us, and embody that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, great. Um, if a man doesn't have access to a shaman or these rituals that you facilitate, how would you suggest he start getting out of that headspace and embodying and this groundedness into masculinity?
um I mean, human beings ritualize behavior always, even when we've lost connection with our most ancient rituals and our earth-based traditions, but we're still ritualizing behavior. I mean, that's why I still am obsessed and love football, because it's one of our last big rituals left, whereby, and it's a very warrior ritual, really. It's very oppositional. You have the opposition, you have the home fans, if you like, and there's all the songs, and there's getting in, and there's the ecstasy as well, the we experience when the goal goes in, and there's the drama, and so there is different ways. It's, I suppose, it's about having that intention, really, to start to explore. As kids, we play all the time. We ritualize life through playing, through pushing ourselves against things, through physical wrestling and stuff like that. And this is all about it's celebrating what it means to be in a body, really. And then gradually through life, you're taught to just detach more and more from that body and become this kind of mind, if you like, that then can fit into the system, and be a productive member of society. So what I would encourage people is just to let go of all of that, and look into childhood and say, what did I enjoy playing? I was very physical as a boy. I loved play fighting. I loved sport. I loved anything that would push me physical. And what I noticed, that when I was going through my mental problems and all of that, I became less and less physical, and I became this kind of this, and I tried to be this kind of pseudo intellectual. I mean, I love reading and I read a lot, but it became completely out of balance, and that's what shamanism gave me initially. And I remember it very particularly. I started just playing again, being physical, being playful, being in, and these, so it, remember what, because inside of every man is that boy who knows exactly what, and it might not be what the adult thinks is best for the man, but the listening to that, I think that's really important. Listening to the boy that wants to play, that wants to, uh and it means being a bit playful, being a bit cheeky, being often going against. I sometimes do this with my students in the woods, that spending a day or something, just not doing what you would I think the routine is what can kill the soul. So it's literally dedicating a day just to go, I'm just going to walk, don't know, jump on a bus, I don't know where it's going, jump on a train, do something, just like not have a plan, leave the phone behind, get lost, end up God knows where, and just to experience a bit of life and a bit of, like, outside, anything outside of the routine. I think breaking routine is really important, being spontaneous. These are the things that are essential to our well-being, and these are the things that, and that's why I love traveling, because and particularly if I don't know where the hell I'm going, and it's just literally because that it creates that opportunity for life.
Yeah. Yeah, so good. What would you say with the men that you are facilitating with their healing? What is the main issue of 2022, 2023 that our men are dealing with?
What's the main issue? I think there is a crisis. I mean, as a lot of people talk about, there is a crisis in masculinity, definitely. I mean, in terms of the suicide rates being the biggest killer for men, I think between 25 and 50. And because there is there's much more fluidity now, which is I think a good thing, and the distinction between male and female is there's a lot more fluidity, which is, like I say, a good thing. Um, I think the crisis is the kind of men that I will meet will often have started a healing journey or gone on a spiritual path. Um, what I perceive, and this is what we we're talking about earlier, is that there can be this still almost trying to please the feminine in some way, still trying to, um, still trying to fit in a certain way, fit into um, an expected what a spiritual man should be like, soft and sensitive and heartfelt. And I'm not saying these things aren't, if they're genuine, then yeah, great. But it can, and I noticed that in my own journey that I think because I had those experiences of very harsh masculinity when I was a teenager, and that very macho, it pushed me the other way. It pushed me much more into developing my kind of, for want of a better word, my feminine side, and it pushed me into much more enjoying female company. And but I was still trying to play a role, and still trying to be fit into that community, so the female community, so developing parts of me that were much softer and more receptive, and etc. um so but that is just another game. It's just another, you just end up more frustrated, and then the anger goes into the shadow, and it erupts in destructive ways with people close to you, when you finally can put off that mask and not be the kind of all nice person or soft person. So I think what the crisis is a spontaneity, and this is what I admire a lot in not all women, obviously, because it's not black and white, but I admire in women there's can be a natural embodiedness through nature, through what happens every single month, through that potentially given birth, etc. And that creates a spontaneity. When you're outside of your body, when you're much more operating from a mental perspective, and men can do this a lot. When I'm training men, they're always looking for the formula. They're looking for, so when they come to shamanism, they're looking, well, how does this work? What's the formula here? If I do this and this, then I'm going to get to here, and that's what needs breaking down, because it destroys spontaneity. It's still trying to be something. It's the male ego is very obvious, I think, and it's very obvious in our physiology even. It's very, when I'm with the male, yeah, it's very external, it's very obvious. So, and that kind of competitiveness, and everything like that. um so what I think the crisis is, and what the challenge is to get rid of all the formulas, get rid of all that mental construct, get rid of trying to be a certain man, whether that's a macho man now it's gone so far the other way, like a sensitive man, sensitive new age man. They're all constructs. I mean, that's why I enjoy spending a lot of time with Indigenous people, because the men and the women, there's a, in my experience, and this is my only my experience, there's a naturalness there's a comfortability in who they are. I think this is a big problem we have, male and female, in Western culture, is we're always trying to develop ideas of who we are, and it's getting worse with social media. It's all constructs. It's all this construct, this to in order to fit into society. So you've got social media, and it takes it to another level. People are literally creating a construct that is so divorced from any physical realness, because it's just an idea. So that's the crisis, I think, and that's the challenge, is to get rid of all of these constructs and find what it means. I mean, we're in this body and this life for a short amount of time.
Yeah. Jess, I know you're just back from your travels. Did you go and visit any of those Indigenous cultures?
Yeah, I mean, I spend time in Mexico. I spend a lot of time in the communities, visiting my friends, the Radico or Huicholi people, which are up in the mountains. And we went on pilgrimage to them. I've been on pilgrimage twice this year, been up to the communities. So yeah, yeah.
Can we talk about how those men differ from, let's say, your typical British man?
We've got the same sense of humour, which is good. They take the piss a lot. So I think that suits the British, and it would suit the Aussies as well. Um, uh, uh, yeah, how do they differ? I mean, as a people, they're tough people. They're really tough people. They live a subsistence-based life. There's small-scale farming. They hunt when necessary. So the men and the women are tough. I mean, they can, and this, I spend a lot of time and I enjoy it because it challenges me physically. We have to fast for long periods of time. I mean, what I've learned is, again, there's this idea with spirituality in the West. And I think this comes from there's uh, um, an influence of Eastern traditions in the 60s, but then combine that with our kind of comfortable Western lifestyles. The spirituality becomes something that is disconnected from survival. And for Indigenous people, the spirituality is all about survival. So the role of the shaman often is and we did a ceremony in April around this, is you can do a whole ceremony to find out where the game will be the next day. So the shaman would track the whatever's being hunted, make a negotiation with the animal that it will give its body and sacrifice itself, and then they will tell the tribe, and then they will go out hunting the next day. And and it's tough up there. I mean, up in the mountains, and and it's done in a ritualistic way, so they have to fast. So fasting can go on for hours, for many hours. They can go hunting off for 12 hours into the bush, um, and and like walking ridiculous amounts of tracking these animals. And so this spirituality is married to this survival of the people, and they're poor. They don't have much money. Like I say, it's subsistence. They sell a bit of jewelry and stuff like that. So there's this strength that I perceive, that I think we've lost quite a lot in we've become soft and I don't mean that from a macho point of view. I just mean that from a human point of view, that we've become so divorced from survival, and spirituality becomes another thing which divorces people even more. They become much more di- disconnected, and that's when it becomes about avoidance. So the difference is and I mean, I personally, they're quite, I experience, they're very soft and beautiful and gentle and loving, but they can be tough, and they're hard teachers for me personally, because they don't, it's about focus. You're not there and like I say, I have this tendency to get a bit spacey sometimes, and whenever I'm like that, it's like focus, come back, be focused, be present. It's much more about presence, because that, and unless you're present in that culture, and they have a lot of problems. There's they have problems with the cartels that are literally in the surrounding areas, so they face life or death situations. So it's so they need to be tough. There's no playing around with spirituality. Spirituality is about life. It's about survival.
That's great. Do you think that what you were talking about men coming into the heart and maybe being a bit soft and not grounding the spirituality, do you think that when men start getting in touch with their feelings, that they come into this heart space, and that's when they do soften, and then it's a matter of the next step where they integrate the feminine and the masculine to become balanced and be able to be, grounded and healthy masculinity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good way of putting it, and I think that last stage is often forgotten, because we come into the heart, um, but then that is seen as the end journey. But actually, yeah, it is much more about integrating, and being able. And this is where I am inspired by the Indigenous people, because they're very heartfelt, and they have this gentle. There's no, it's gentleness, particularly in ceremony. But then when they need to be, they're, like I say, that it's very focused. It's very tough. It's like, and they like to push edges. So I think, yeah, both, definitely both.
But do you think that the softer the heart, the feeling, the healing has to come before the integration?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
what
mean,
would
I think there's this. I once read, I don't know, because a lot of things are attributed to North American Indians that they've never said, but there was this one thing that stood out to me, that the longest journey a man will take is from here, to the head to the heart. But in order to be a leader, they have to make the return journey.
yes.
I think that's kind of what you're saying. It's like we need to drop in, but also we need to be able to, because in order to embody the masculine, this is for women as well, is we have to be detached sometimes. And this is the gift of being a man, because we don't hold a child, a baby inside of us. Even if we father a baby, there's always a detachment of some description. We don't have that intimacy and holding of that. So this is the gift, I think, that the masculine can bring, is the ability of detachment. But the problem is, because too much feeling, too much emotions, too much merging of everything, too much water, it just becomes a complete mess, if you like. It just, like, everything just merges in, and there's no boundaries, and I think as a culture we're really going into this place where we were very detached, and then we're kind of waking up. Oh, we've got feelings. Oh, there's emotions actually exist, and we need to give them actual. We need to honor them. But too much of that, then it creates this place where people are drowning. And I see this for men and women, where they start going on a healing journey, discover some of the traumas that they've experienced, because that they've just been in complete denial of, and then end up just going down the rabbit hole, and just going down and down, because water will always find its lowest point. So if you follow water, it's going to go to the depths, and then when you think you're in the depths, then it will find another low point. And that's where you need the more fire and the air. And this is the gift of the masculine brings, for women and for men, is the ability to detach and come out, to expand. So the soul will descend, the soul descends in, and that's part of a healing journey, and the spirit then expands out. And it's the balance between these two polarities where we can find wholeness, I think. So absolutely, there is, we have to go into that journey, that, and that's usually the dark night of the soul. That's when people go through the crisis, and it's down and down and down to the depths. But then there, and often, and people aren't necessarily taught this, but I think it's really important that there'll be a point where it's, there's, for men and for women, there's a point that now's the time to come out again, and that has to be a conscious decision. Because if I keep going into this, if I keep looking into my childhood for all the pain that I'm now experiencing in my life, if I keep looking at my ancestors, all the pain they went through, if I then look at the environment and see how much pain that is in, and trauma, I'm just gonna lose myself completely, and I will stay, and I won't be used for anyone else. So we have to make this decision to then come out, and then and that's something I found really working with the Indigenous people. This has been the biggest inspiration, because I used to be a person that would carry a lot of that and would be very heavy, and they're facing the loss of their culture, destruction of their traditions, modern world moving in, the cartel on, like real problems with that, and they retain this brightness of spirit and this lightness, and I think that's a really big teaching.
Yeah. So if men can recognize or are recognizing themselves in those watery depths, and you've said, now at a certain point you have to decide to spiral on up, what are some practical steps that those men can start to explore that will help them on their journey upwards?
Practical steps is always getting in the body, so doing something physical, spending time in nature for sure, because a lot of these, and that's when we start exploring our emotions, etc., we can often do it in a human environment with a therapist, or a guide or something like that, and to take that out into nature, because nature will help to disperse these powerful emotions and energies, and just realize that if I am getting lost in the emotions or whatever, just go for a long walk, spend time, give some offerings to nature, give thanks for my life. Start, and to really, it's about turning things around, and to the point where you're giving thanks for your life and realizing what you do have, rather than focusing on the issues or the emotions or the traumas or the problems. That involves a conscious decision to go, yeah, that's true, all of that, but actually my life is I've got all these other blessings in my life. So spending, doing something physical, sport, getting into the body. One of the best things and the most grounding thing a man can do is going off into nature on their own, on his own, and lighting a fire, giving an offering to the fire first, and just spending time and just talk to that fire. Just spend time with that fire. And I mean, most, hopefully, most, or maybe less so nowadays, men will have done this as a boy in their childhood, and this is part of just, this is where we need to reconnect to the physical, our physical selves through nature, reconnecting to nature, so we're not just looking and this is, I think, what I've been trying to say the whole thing, try not to go too internal. I think the problem is when people start going on a healing journey, they go too internalize. They internalize everything. Get that out. Do the rituals. Be in nature. Just spend time.
Yeah, great, Jez. We've got about half an hour left, and I know
Wow.
you've got so much wisdom and experience. What needs to be brought into this conversation that we haven't touched on in regards to man, masculinity, the healing journey?
Um, what needs? I mean, we've talked about a lot. I've talked a lot. I think this is another thing, and I notice a lot with men when they start going on a healing journey, they take it very serious, which it needs to be taken seriously. But I think retaining a lightness. So remember the humor, and uh, humor's there. Humor is there to one of the tools of humor. And when I spend a lot of time around Indigenous shamans, they spend a lot of time, like I said, taking the piss. So when I try and get really earnest and sincere, they would just kind of bat me down with just a joke. And when I feel like I've experienced this kind of really profound experience, again, they will often just bat me down with a joke. And it's and and the teaching for me has been about not taking myself too seriously, not taking the path too seriously, not taking my life too seriously in some ways, because the more serious we take things, the 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 more pressure we put on ourselves, the more we suffocate things, we suffocate the life. So humor is used to, in my experience, it's also can, if there's any heavy energies like in a group, humor can disperse a lot of that. It can disperse. Now I experienced the real negative side of that humor through that bullying when I was in a teenager, where humor was used as a weapon, which it can do be very much in male culture, more masculine male culture. There's an edge to it. It's used where it is actually used to shame often, and to keep the social conditioning. So men can have this relationship with humor often that can be quite ambivalent. It can be actually, I used to use, or often men might be, if they're honest with themselves, say, I used to use humor as a weapon or as a defense against feeling. I used to joke or I would take the piss a lot, and in order to really rile someone when I was angry with them, I was upset with them, instead of in confronting that, I would just make a joke out of it, but there would be laced with an edge. So because I experienced that, I was on the kind of receiving end of that in a what I perceived as a destructive way, and it was destructive to me. I then was very careful often with what I said. I didn't want to upset people because I'd really felt the kind of negative side of that. Um, but I come this full circle where I've realized that humor is really important, and sometimes you can use humor as just to make a point, but as long as it doesn't have that charge of, and I think when men can get more in touch with their anger in a healthy way and allow that to have an expression in a healthy way, it doesn't have to come out through this biting, cutting thing. But what it can do is humor can be used to really um, say the unsayable. So to, and this is something that we're really struggling as a society right now, as a culture, because there's a lot of um, pressure on people not saying the wrong thing, or not upsetting people. But humor's always been there, and it's part of the what we call the trickster archetype, and this is an important male archetype, the trickster. So the trickster is the one that is a contrary, that breaks social taboos, that breaks the society wherever you've gone, whether it's indigenous people or modern civilization. It needs rules, it needs structure to hold the society together, and it needs these kind of agreements between people, what is taboo, what is allowed. the trickster is the one that breaks the taboo, and it acts as a social release valve, and that's what humor does. It acts so people to say the unsayable, to think the unthinkable, so it doesn't get suppressed and then come out in these very dark and destructive ways. So I think, I mean, it's a really long, complicated answer, which I've been banging on about, but really, what my advice would be: don't lose your sense of humor. Realize that life holds this dark and this light, and it's our ability with humor that can can traverse the two. So don't take yourself too seriously. Don't take life too seriously. Don't take, and that's also about what I was saying before, getting in touch with this spontaneity. I know when I'm in trouble, if you like, emotionally, when I'm going through something, because I lose, that's the first thing, is I lose my sense of humor. And then someone can make a joke and I would take it really personally and get angry or whatever. And that's a sign for me that I've come out of balance, really, and I need to as quick as possible rediscover my sense of humor. And that's what spending a lot of time with the Indigenous people, because you don't have a chance to lose your sense of humor. It's relentless. You have to keep that lightness of spirit.
Oh, that's a great barometer. Yeah. What would you say? What are your highest values as a man?
My highest values is to love, and to show love, and to experience love, and to not, that's what's more important than anything, is to be able to unashamedly, unabashedly express love. I think that's what all the journey for me has been about. I felt that from a young age. I felt this love and wonder, and at the world. I've always felt that, and and that's made me quite naive in some ways. Um, but because I felt I had to be a different, and it became, a lot of that came from growing up in a very male household, and like I say, in a very working class male environment where it was all about hiding that, and hiding the vulnerability, hiding love, and trying to be this person that I could never be. Um, so my highest values is to be able to express, receive, express love, gratitude, wonder, and beauty as well.
Yeah, and for you that, has a natural inclination to that, what would you say to men who have always been very stoic and not been encouraged to express love and that softer side of themselves within, healthy masculinity? What would you say to those men to encourage them to maybe start being more expressive of love?
Take a risk.
Hmm.
I think this is where that male, um, natural inclination to to be more risk, to take more risks, use that as a to take more risks, to be open, and vulnerable emotionally. It's worth it. It is worth it, honestly. You 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 get hurt more in life. That's for sure. You. I mean, I know that I've just come out of 3 years of intense grief from losing my wife, um, but I would prefer to go through all of that, because that is an expression of my love, and it's my, there's a wonderful talk by Martin Prachtel called, which is very good for men, I think, called Grief and Praise, and I would encourage people to listen to that as well. It's on YouTube. Um, basically, the premise is, the more we grieve through loss, and that's not just death but other things, the more we get in touch with life, the more we can praise it. And the more we praise life, is we're actually grieving it, because we're saying this moment, this perfect sunset, whatever, will never happen again. This perfect moment. So it's this circular thing. So I think, yeah, take a risk. Really take a risk, and um, it's worth it. It's because you feel much more connected to life, and that's everyone's birthright.
Mm. And we'll put that link down below. May I ask you further questions about your healing of grief around your wife?
Yeah, yeah. I'm at a stage now I can talk about it much more. Yeah, freely. Yeah.
Thank you. So what would you say, for people that are going through grief and really struggling, what would you say to those men?
I mean, it's when talking about grief, it's really hard not to go into cliches, but because often the cliches, there is truth in them. Uh, um, the biggest thing I would say, there's no avoidance. You can try anything to avoid, and trust me, I did. You can just try and distract yourself. You can try and avoid, and sometimes that's necessary, because it's like being in a tsunami. It's you're just, you know, sometimes you need to just come out for up for air, and completely cut off. And that's something I would say, it's okay to cut off as well, to hold those two things in balance, that there is no avoidance, but sometimes it's okay just to cut off and say, I can't deal with this. There's no, I can't even go there. And for months it would be like that for me. I'd be sucked into this tsunami, this storm uh, uh, I mean, if grief, the thing about grief is it's incredibly physical experience. it's it's People talk about the emotions of it, but it's more the physical. It's like not being able to walk, being punched in the guts, not feeling this searing, burning physical pain that you just, I mean, I feel that I felt a lot of gratitude, and that I was able to have tools where I could just allow this physical experience just to wash through me, and not try and control it, or not be so terrified of it, and just to be allow that, and just to be there, and just until it does subside. um so I mean, I feel that I was lucky also that I had the shamanism. I had rituals. I could go and see my friends in Mexico, and receive lots of healing, um, and be put back together by them. But that involved taking risks as well. I remember 6 months after my wife died, one of the hardest things, I was going to go on pilgrimage to Mexico, and I just shut down. It was winter in England, and I just not barely left the house. I could barely function, and it was one of the hardest things I ever did, was get the bus up to Heathrow and walk through those gates, because I knew it would be a challenging experience at the best of times, going on pilgrimage with Indigenous people. But in that moment, I felt like I just felt so raw. And that decision to go through those gates and get on that plane was one of the hardest decisions I ever made. And by taking that risk and going outside of my comfort zone, it brought incredible rewards in terms of healing, and it wasn't the end of grief by any description, but it was like a, a light on the way, and these different lights that can help sustain you, and help you live again. So the other thing I would really advise men, from and this is only my personal experience, is that embrace the fact that this will change you and your life profoundly. and what your previous expectations, beliefs, or ideas about life, they'll be gone. And that is an opportunity on some level. And it's only now I can begin to see that. That's 3 years later, more than 3 years later, because I know that now I am different, and I will always be different from that moment in my life. And but there's great things that can come out of that. That it is. I lost faith. I lost faith in my spirituality and in everything. I thought, what's the point of being a healer, doing all this stuff, if I can't help the person that I want to help the most? If I can't, yeah, what's the point of all of this? And so I was angry. Allow yourself to be angry as well. Really allow yourself to be angry. Allow yourself to be disillusioned. Allow all of that, because eventually something will come back in. And now I'm different, and now I feel that, and I know I'll never be the same again. And I'm sounds really strange in the circumstances, but I'm immensely grateful that I will be different, because I'm more in touch with life. I can I can cry like that now, and now I always struggled crying, and that was a lot of part of my problems. I can be in the supermarket. I don't try and fight it. I don't feel any shame around it. It's a beautiful gift. And so I'm more connected to life, and my ideas. I'm not so constrained. I think when you go through something so profound, you're not so constrained by social conditioning even.
How do you find meaning? How did you come to peace with understanding why a relatively young lady would die before her time, let's say? How do you justify that spiritually?
One thing my stepdaughter said, which I, it was difficult to hear at the time, but my wife's funeral was, do not say it was before her time, because it was her time. And we have so much, and this is why I say this different perspective on life, because we have so many expectations and stories around what is a good life, what is an early death, and what should be expected. And they're just human stories. They're just made up stories. And this is my my having gone through that, my ambivalence. I do. It's really paradoxical. I feel more connected to life than ever, and I love life more than ever. I feel less attached to it, because death is just another gateway. And again, it can be a cliche, and especially in spiritual circles, um, my sense is you can only really say that when you've had it up close and personal, when you've gone through the emotions of it, when you've gone through the trauma of it and the pain of it. People go, oh, death is just another doorway, without understanding the full nature of that doorway, that it is profound. It has profound effects on people. However, from my perspective now, life and death are just a dance, and that it's not about time. Time doesn't even exist on a profound level. And so it's we have this dance in and out of realities, and that Ali's had her beautiful dance, and lived a life also that many people don't get to live in many different lifetimes, and had such a profound effect. So that's the way, yeah. But that comes from experience. I couldn't say that 3 years ago, because it would have been too painful, and I was too angry. I wouldn't have, I couldn't have, I could have maybe understood that a bit intellectually, or held it as a kind of ideal, but now I feel it from experience.
Fascinating. Thank you. Um, as a shaman, can you please give us a broad overview of plant medicine, presuming that that's part of your healing module? Because a lot of men are interested in it, and we've spoken a bit about it on different episodes of Heart Warriors, but I'd love to have your take on it.
Um, Plant medicine. Okay, the way I teach is without plant medicine primarily, because I teach with the drum, and I began with medicine 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, in the desert in Mexico in the Huiracuta, but it wasn't with an indigenous tribe, and then through um, my own experiences, I came away from that, and for 10 years, 12 years, I didn't practice any plant medicine. And then the same tribe, the Wuro, were called into my life through synchronistic experiences. Plant medicine is very potent and powerful. I'm a bit of a purist around this, in that for me, it's about the tradition that surrounds the plant. It's the most important thing. So the plant is a tool. That's a terrible word. It's not a tool. The plant has a spirit to it that really helps us. It helps to introduce us to the invisible realities, to what is real, to the spirit, what we call the spirit world. So the plant is this doorway, this, but it has a spirit to it, and that spirit, like any spirit, is external to us, and it needs a lot of respect. So it needs a lot of honoring. The problem with plant medicine I find nowadays is that people are doing ayahuasca one week, peyote the next, then mushrooms, and it becomes a bit of, and they're losing any kind of respect for the traditions. So the cultures that do use plant medicine, for example, uh, they have to do many different pilgrimages and offerings and sacrifices and fasting in order to even harvest the plant. So there's huge amounts of rituals and honoring that goes into this, and then it's used primarily for healing purposes. So it's used to diagnose sicknesses often, and it's used to help us to what I was describing before, to get in touch with what is our soul, what is our soul requiring, what is who we are really on a deeper, profound level. Um, if you're just going to one ceremony one week and the next, you're not doing the offerings, you're not doing the rituals, or sometimes not even making the sacrifices that is needed. So the first thing I would say is, don't treat it like a chemical or a drug or a have respect. And people can do this in different ways. It doesn't mean to say you have to get into shamanism, but just have respect. Have respect for what this powerful, and once you're introduced to the spirit of that, so if you're introduced to the spirit of the ayahuasca, once you've consumed it, will be that spirit will be with you for quite a long time. So choose wisely. I mean, like I say, I'm more of a purist, so I will only really do any plant medicine myself with indigenous cultures where it comes from. And So that's the kind of preamble, if you like, and it's all about respect and not just grabbing hold of something. If it's done in the right way and with an open heart, it can be incredibly healing and powerful, and it can unlock huge amounts in people. I have lots of people that come to my training who have been, and they may not have gone into it in the right way. It may have just happened spontaneously, or they've even recreationally, but they've had profound experiences on plant medicine, and they want to provide some context to that, and that's when they come to the training. So it's these are wonderful tools, amazing, incredible tools, in order to open us up to more profound realities and more profound sense of who we are. So, but the bottom line is respect. That's all I would say. Just respect, and respect yourself within that, because if you consume plant medicines, you're going to you're going to open the doorways to some pretty profound experience and knowledge, and that might take quite a long time to integrate. So you need to respect yourself. You need to decide whether you're ready to go through profound changes in your life, and a commitment to that profound changes, and to really, the most of the, like any ceremony, whether it's plant medicine or not, most of the so-called work is done outside. It's done afterwards. It's done how you, because people can have profound experiences, visions, feelings of unity, oneness, love, whatever you want to call it, but then they go back to their normal lives. How do we bring those experiences into our life to change ourselves? And that's the hard work, because it means changing habits. It means changing, making tough decisions.
Oh, so good. We'll wrap up now, Jez. So, a couple of things. I know you are an author, so please share your book or books. Let people know where they can find you. And then after that, if we could wrap up with a final message to men, please.
Yeah, okay. My first book was called The Heart of Life: Shamanic Initiation and Healing in the Modern World. That was 2015, I think. That's around most places online, etc. And that was much more my personal story, and a lot about what I shared today. Although I've shared more today than I've shared ever, I think. Uh, and um, and the second book is called The Wisdom of Mental Illness: Shamanism, Mental Health, and the Renewal of the World. This is really good book because it looks at mental health, and what we call mental illness, from a, not just from a shamanic perspective, but a spiritual perspective, trying to get out of this mainstream idea that any mental struggles is a disease or a problem, and pathology, and realize that sometimes these experiences are actual gifts that open us up to wider realities. So looking a lot at that, I explore a lot around psychedelics and plant medicine, because obviously that's been introduced, that's coming into mental health treatment now. There's a lot of clinical trials, and these are originally shamanic plant medicine. So I go a lot deeper into your question around plant medicine, and some of the kind of what we need to bear in mind, but also some of the gifts that it can bring. So that's anyone who's had an experience, or has a loved one who's going through those kind of struggles, the dark nights of the soul. That's a really good book. It's less personal. It's much more looking at what treatments are available, etc., from a spiritual perspective. So they're my two books.
And we'll put those links below in the description.
Cool. And my website's secondsighthealing.com. I'm on Facebook, Jez Hughes, where I just rant a lot, and make a few bad jokes. And yeah, that's it, I think, really.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll drop all those links below so people can find you and your books. And now, what would you say as a final message to men, Jez?
Embrace your heart.
Mm.
Embrace your heart, and have pride in who you are as well. I think that's really important. Have faith in life, faith in, I think if we have faith in life deep down, it we can be vulnerable. And that means opening the heart, and being proud of that, being proud of who we are, where you come from. Be proud of your lineage, your ancestors, whatever they've done. If you need to forgive some of them, but be proud of who you are, the lineage. You are the person who stands at the front, or maybe you've got a few descendants, but you're the gift of your ancestors on this earth, and make them proud as well.
Great wisdom. Wow, what a wonderful journey, Jez. Thanks so much for sharing it with us. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for being really open and for allowing me to bang on.
Oh, my pleasure. So, thanks everyone for watching. And incidentally, Jez, I was saying at the beginning, you're number 50 of 100 heart warriors at least that I said I'd be interviewing. So we're at the halfway mark. So
Cool.
congratulations on number 50.
Whoop, whoop. Yeah. Do I
Um,
get special prize?
you can come back and do a man speak. That's a series where you can pick your topic and have the whole 90 minutes talking about your favorite subject, whatever you're passionate about. So
Football.
is that a good prize?
Leeds United.
Yeah, you could talk about football, I guess, and how to integrate it in a healthy way. Yeah, why?
That's a that's going to be a book one time. Yeah, the shamanic view of football when I get round
Yeah,
to
well,
it.
let's make it into you saw it on Man Speak first, right? I'll be on to you for that.
Cool.
So, everyone, thanks for watching. If you could like, subscribe and share, and thank you again, Jez. And if you could just stay on, and we'll get a title for this show.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, bye everyone. I'll be back in a few days
Thank
with
you.
another episode of Heart Warriors.
Thank you.